Good evening, and welcome to Screentone Club. This is episode 26, recording on the 9th of June 2019, for release on the 11th of June 2019. This is your fortnightly look at manga. We'll focus on joint discussion. We're going to announce our series ahead of time so you can read along if you so fancy. And also we have some extra bonus content for you in this episode, where, well, we'll have a field trip report. But first and foremost, my name is Elliot Page, and joined, as always, is my lovely co-host, Mr. Andy Hanley. How you doing, Andy?
Yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks. Life is good.
Yeah, it's been 3 weeks since we last recorded one of these because we obviously shifted our schedule around for ye old London Comic Con. So yeah, now the world has kind of somewhat settled back down again. We can reconvene to discuss all things great and good, like manga.
Yes, it's been weird having that gap because I just especially come last weekend, I was just kind of pacing up and down. I need to talk to manga. I just need to talk about manga with somebody. What do I do? This is too long.
Well, you can talk to manga whenever you like. Just maybe don't make a habit of it in public, otherwise you might get asked to leave.
Yeah. Sadly, it doesn't seem to talk back.
If it does, then oof, dangerous. Quick note for our patrons. You have 1 week left to suggest to us a title for our bonus episode for this month. Those who chip into our Patreon get the chance to suggest titles to us for these bonus episodes, and if you're on the Patreon, you get to listen to them. We're going to be putting up, in the week after this episode, I'm going to be putting up one of our previous bonus episodes in our normal feed, so you can have a little listen to one that I'm quite proud of, so you too can see what you're missing out on, and maybe think about joining up, ? Also on Patreon business, shout outs to Rob Jessup once and always, for helping and supporting the podcast at an almost silly degree. So thank you as always, Rob. As a quick note, just because I'm in full flow, we've got a quick little bonus section, in that just yesterday went to the British Museum in ye old London town and went to their manga exhibition, which has just recently opened, and I thought I'd give us a quick trip report on it, if you don't mind. And Andy, you're a bit far away in the frozen Northlands, but if you've got any questions about it, just, chip in.
For sure.
Cool. So we booked ahead of time for this and was very glad we did, because I met a friend just outside of the front gates. Hi, Chris. And he was unable to get into that yesterday because it was sold out. They had a strict sort of numbering and admittance scheme, which meant that he was unable to buy a ticket for that day. So that was lucky. And also, I'm glad that when we went was as busy as it ever gets, because first and foremost, it was quite busy. It was in the British Museum on the far side of the rotunda from the front entrance. And it was quite a sort of dark affair, where it was sort of very backlit sort of museum exhibits. Very structured in terms of flow, much like an IKEA, I suppose, where you go around the furniture shop and you have to follow the lines. But I'll cut to the quick on this because I don't want to take up the entire podcast with it. But basically, the manga exhibition, if you're the sort of person who has hunted down this podcast and is already interested in manga, then this exhibition might be a bit base level for you, frankly. It's kind of a shame, at least in my point, because I would sum the exhibition up as being a very, very good introduction, a very honest, earnest introduction, which some things I looked at and thought, wouldn't really spend time on that, but sure, why not? It has a quick cosplay section and a bit about Comiket and other sort of things, and the whole thing had a very much an outsider's eye on it. It was sponsored by the bank Citi, boo hiss, who were poaching it as or pitching it as a very much a case of, as a global bank, we enjoy the global reach of manga. And yeah, whatever. But there was a whole heap of interesting stuff in there. The title image they've used in all the advertising art has been for Golden Kamuy, and they had some, original art from that there, and they discussed that, and they had quite a lot from, the author of Vagabond, also the author of Real, the basketball wheelchair manga, who all their stuff was listed as being no photography please, and yet every mofo still took pictures. And they had, of course, Tezuka and quite a few other people. But it was the one thing where it was an introduction. It was a very, very good introduction that you might take your parents to when you don't want to have to keep explaining what you're reading. It covered the business of making manga, the history, which was a bit all over the shop and didn't really tell a cohesive story. It just sort of told you flashes of, Japanese historical illustrative narrative, and then kind of jumped forward to manga exists now. it had some interesting little parts in that, and it had a general sort of piece about, manga in the wider scope, about fandom, about cosplay, about Studio Ghibli, about, theatrical films and how it's sort of like, bled around the world. And yeah, and the one thing, as I say, is that I wish it had gone further, like gone one level deeper, because it had a lot of original art from some famous series, like, Astro Boy. They had some really amazing original pages from Astro Boy there, including some from the Pluto or Greatest, Strongest Robot in the World storyline, which is kind of mind melting from my point of view, because holy cow. And some stuff from Tokyo Terra Rebel Girls and Princess Jellyfish and Gogo 13, and loads of real big numbers, including some very strange, like almost orphaned clamp art at the very entrance to the exhibition that was then completely forgot about. It had a rather strange Alice in Wonderland sort of like initial like setup, which it then completely forgot about, which was confusing. So yeah, as I say, as someone who wanted a deep, like, hearty meal, like a meaty meal of manga and discussions with the creators and, examining the tools and what makes manga so big. It didn't really have that, but it was a very good introduction. So as I say, somewhat disappointing, but I would still say that definitely a 4 out of 5 star sort of exhibition to visit. It was nice at the very least seeing manga get that much play and earnest sort of appraisal and approval, rather than just look at these weird Jap tunes. So
yeah. I mean, in a way, like, that sounds like almost exactly what I wanted to hear. Like, I almost wanted to hear people say, like, hey, this wasn't for me. Like, as somebody who's kind of, like, in deep on that stuff, like, it feels like it's more important for this to be sort of accessible for people who maybe only kind of know, a little about the medium, or perhaps have only kind of like heard about it in passing and are just kind of like interested in learning more. So like maybe that's exactly what that exhibition should be, because that certainly was kind of my feeling about it when it got announced. Is like, I hope this isn't just like deep insider baseball on kind of, the history of manga. Like, I hope it is accessible to people and that it brings more people into the form as kind of, as something that is amazing and awesome and kind of, somewhat different from Western comics. So I'm kind of quite happy to hear that it's kind of going in that direction, rather than perhaps catering to kind of the likes of ourselves and perhaps the people listening to this podcast. I mean, I guess there's an argument that it could have split it both ways a bit more, but I don't know. That sounds like that's what that exhibition should have been to my mind.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with you. The main thing that kind of put something in my craw personally is that they had kind of ridiculous levels of access to creators, to their work, to their originals, to, and the people running it clearly had, at the very minimum, if not a passion, then a knowledge about what manga is doing. And it can display. And it felt like a missed opportunity, at least, where it had hands on all these different creators that I really wanted to see more done about. And, the most the creators got a word in was a single line, little sort of, little statement they could make next to their mugshot, or lack of for people who don't allow mugshots. So, yeah, it was a good exhibition. It certainly succeeded at what it was aiming to do, but as someone who is like deep would have liked something else. But then, if to accomplish that, they would have required a lot more space, because it was already a quite cramped exhibition for the amount they actually managed to get in. So yeah, it was very good. I just hope that this isn't seen as being a line drawn and then, right, we're done now, we've looked at manga. Like this, I would like to see this jumping off into a whole other suite of exhibitions. I mean, hell, the Japan Center out of nowhere, and I had no idea this was going on. The Japan Center decided to just piggyback on the popularity of this exhibition, and has now got an entire season of manga stuff going on, including in this week a sit-down and interview with Naoki Urasawa, he of Monster and 20th Century Boys fame. And I was livid, because it's like, I never heard of this at all. And of course, I'm already pre-booked for something else in London on that day, so what the hell? But yeah, there's also an exhibition at Japan House, which is worth looking at, because it's got a lot of Urasawa originals, which I think if you try and take pictures of, they'll cut your hands off because you try and digitize them somehow.
Yeah. But I mean, it's... hopefully, given your comments about, the original day people were planning to go to selling out and it being busy when you were there, like, hopefully, at the end of the day, that's the kind of thing that kind of drives, more exhibitions and more kind of, investigation and analysis of this stuff is like, is throughput and people actually going to this thing. So hopefully that bodes well for, perhaps some more kind of in-depth, pieces around certain creators, certain works, or, the medium as a whole. Cause that's kind of the key is like, if you get people in through the door, then there's definitely going to be an appetite, in terms of getting sponsors and in terms of actually, doing the legwork to do that stuff. I will say, like, as somebody who's involved in planning and running an exhibition in London last year, like, sometimes it's also very much a case of having grandiose plans that perhaps fall a little short of what you'd ideally like in terms of, cost and time and access as well. So I think sometimes when it comes to what could have been done, it would always be interesting to have, like, the fly on the wall documentary of, like, what they were trying to start with. Because I'm sure there were probably some things around certain creators that were probably just kind of ended up being nixed because said creators were too busy working on stuff. And there's probably some stuff that they would have loved to have brought over, but, costs of doing these things can sometimes be prohibitive as well. So, it's always that kind of, the insider side of things. Like, I'd love to see, like, what the initial plan for their kind of, like, blue sky, what they would have liked to have done with this exhibition was, because I bet there was probably things in there that, just didn't come to fruition at the end of the day. But no, I mean, it sounds good overall, though.
Yeah, and the very last thing like I say, it's definitely worth a visit. All my carping aside, like, it's definitely worth a visit. The one thing that I was really glad to see, but also very sad to see, was they had they had quite a lot of originals of Keiko Takemiya's To Terra, which is an amazing epochal science fiction manga, which is like kind of a pure distillation of like mid-century sci-fi, and is heartrendingly beautiful. And it had the originals there, and they were beautiful to see, and it just made it all the more irritating to me that the free volume edition that Vertical most recently put out, which was also an amazing release, is now hell of a out of print, and you basically need to eBay them to get them for silly money. And it just broke my heart, like, seeing these originals, and it's such a beautiful series, and it's like, oh yeah, we can't see it. Also, side note, they had a QR code to download the Shonen Jump app right in like a centerpiece wall, and they also had a number of other QR codes where they had links to like samplers of popular series there as well, in this sort of central lending library section. So whoever put that in, smart move, good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as somebody who works in marketing, I'll say keep QR codes on my beautiful children when it comes to events, because like, that's a real nice, easy way of giving people, like, hey, when you go away from this, here's a thing, here's a thing you can download, look at, whatever. Like, it's really nice and kind of, low key and easy to do. So yeah, that's definitely a good thing to kind of get people on that road and kind of show people what's available and out there. And I mean, hopefully, when it comes to exhibits around works that are out of print, hopefully that will again kind of give people the nudges to be like, maybe we should reprint this, see if we can release it digitally, etc. So yeah. Fingers crossed it actually kind of moves the needle somewhat if people suddenly say, hey, I saw this thing at this exhibition but I can't buy it, like, can I have it please? Yeah, for sure. Okay, but yeah, that's my kind of wrap up on the British Museum, the exhibition, the British Museum. It's still ongoing for a few months. The museum itself recommends you pre-book to avoid disappointment. Also, please be aware, don't go there with any kind of luggage, because they're doing very serious bag checks. And if you go there with anything larger than a backpack, they're going to tell you to take a hike. So just be aware of that. So yeah, that's that bit out of the way. So moving on to back to normal running is our returning champions feature. I've got a thing on here as well, but Andy, do you want to take it away with something you've added? Yes, so we talked about the first volume a little while ago and kind of bemoaned its lack of digital availability. But thankfully, My Solo Exchange Diary is now available digitally, both of its volumes. So if you haven't checked it out, obviously you can go back and listen to our podcast on Volume 1, wherein we will strongly recommend that you do so. And now it's available digitally. I finally stopped holding off on picking up Volume 2 and checked it out. And I mean, the first volume of My Solo Exchange Diary, like for people who aren't aware, it's very much kind of a self-analysis, a kind of autobiographical self-analysis on the author's part of kind of like her life, and her kind of struggles with various things. And the first volume kind of, it gets to a pretty upbeat place. Like, it feels like the author has kind of got a lot of their shit together, effectively. Like, they've kind of figured out, moving out of their parents' place. They're kind of starting to put tentative feelers out in terms of relationships. They think, this feels pretty good. Like, there's a bit of a kind of a sting to the end of that first volume, but it's like, generally speaking, things are looking up, and
this feels healthier than it started.
Exactly, and like given how kind of frank and forthright it is, and kind of off the back of my lesbian experience with loneliness, like kind of you get to the point where you're really invested in this author as a person. Like, you kind of want them to be okay. And that makes this second volume, My Solo Exchange Diary, really hard reading, because like it is very much the story of the author kind of backsliding hard. In a lot of the progress that they make just feels like it just kind of evaporates away, and like it's very tough to read in places. Like, it kind of goes into some real kind of murky subjects, self-harm, like alcoholism. She suddenly effectively hits a brick wall and kind of ends up in a really rough place. And it still has everything that is really great about this series. Like, it's still very frank and forthright. It still has the author has this fantastic way of kind of describing, her emotional state and the things that happen to her in a way that lets you understand, like, how that feels and what that's like, even as somebody who hasn't kind of experienced these things for yourself. Like, there's one really great moment where, kind of a friend that she's made online kind of like goes and meets her, and they hang out for a day, and just this friend just casually gives her like a goodbye hug, and like there's basically a panel where she's walking away. It's like, it's just crazy how somebody can just casually give you something that you've been wanting for like over a decade.
Oh yeah,
and it's just,
hugs are the good shit.
Yeah, it's just these kind of little moments where you kind of like realize, it's so kind of illustrative and instructive of, this person's state of mind, and it really kind of helps to hit home about that kind of stuff. And to be fair, like the second volume and effectively like the end of the series, things have improved again. Things are kind of like, back on the up and up, but it's a tough read. Like, it's really hard, especially having kind of come through like the previous books of this author, to see them kind of reach the state and the seeming low point that they do. And like, it's kind of, it's a bummer. Like, it's fantastic to read. It continues to be that, but it's very much a case of like, hey, steel yourself before you read this, especially if you are, as I have been, like invested in this author, because you're gonna go for a ride with this one. Yeah,
I can't really say I'm surprised, but I am still saddened. Like, not it's not the case of being sad that a series quote got bad. It's more that I'm worried for the creator, because I remember when I found out this was a 2-volume work, and I thought, I felt like this concept had more road to it, and it seemed like a way of putting down material that the author was comfortable with, and to hear and to then see the second volume was the last one, and then also see the cover art, which suggests some unsavory things. Well, not unsavory. It suggests some rather portentous things in the life of the protagonist that kind of put me on warning. I have bought this digitally, and I have it downloaded on my tablet, but have not really worked up the chutzpah to read it just yet. But yeah, I appreciate the warning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like it is very definitely kind of, a trigger warning thing in a very real sense. And I mean, it's, to be fair, the kind of the series ends with the author very much explaining why this is the end of it. Like, I think there's a realization that's like, hey, as valuable as it is writing about my personal experiences as they pertain to other people, this is also really hurtful to some of those other people, and like, it's really hard for them. And like, it's kind of one of those things where it's very understandable, and again, very franking, coming from like, this is why this needs to end where it does. Like, it's not really about anything else other than this kind of realization that's like, this is, as much good as this is maybe doing me, like it is also doing damage to other people around me, and I can't do that anymore, which is like a perfectly reasonable way of looking at that.
Yeah, it's a much safer work to produce when you're an unknown and you're isolated, but when like people start knowing who you are, that starts to get dangerous, I suppose.
Yeah, and once you're kind of doing it as a full-time job and like all your family knows about it and what you do, obviously that is tricky. But yeah, I mean, for all of the downer stuff in it, there's some really beautiful kind of heartwarming moments as well. Like, her relationship with her family, which, is kind of one of the main struggles that she has right throughout kind of her work. Like, the way a lot of that ends up is kind of like the one kind of sort of beautiful flower that blossoms from it, if you like. It's very much like, if there's one thing that she manages to kind of get to grips with, it's kind of her relationship with her family. And that's kind of, for all the bad stuff that happens, that's kind of like the part to warm your heart, like, up against that. And also, like, as a little finale, there's also kind of an extra kind of one-shot work that she did for some magazine, that's kind of like, just dropped at the end of the book, which it's not particularly great, but it's kind of interesting just to see, like, oh, this is kind of this author working outside of their purely kind of autobiographical sense. Like, it's still very heavily influenced by their experiences and their viewpoint on life, like to a very on the nose degree that kind of doesn't really work for me. But it was interesting to see, at least, of like, okay, like this is you working outside of kind of the paradigm that we're used to seeing here in the West. So, that's kind of an interesting little extra vignette as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've got, as I say, I got that picked up and I look forward to reading that, but oof, okay, man. I mean, that sounds a lot more interesting than just saying more of the same, but ooh, that sounds grim. So we shall see. Cool. So my returning champion is something that I threatened to do, both when we were doing the first volume, and it is, I read the rest of Girls' Last Tour. It runs to 6 volumes, and Girls' Last Tour continues to be more great stuff with Cheeto and Yuri as they adventure ever upwards. At one point in volume 4, you get their like origin story, basically, of how they got the Kettenkrad and what set them on their journey. And things, like, in general, start to take a slightly more melancholic tone as they start to approach what is basically going to be the end of their journey. And as it becomes more apparent, or they start to believe that the end of their journey may as well be the end of their lives, but also the end of the city as it exists, when they come across some other sort of entities or individuals who kind of fill in a few gaps. But it's not like it plot dumps you at any point. But there are some very sad moments. They at one point adopt a little sort of funny faced little creature like a lizard. They get a camera at one point and they take tons of pictures of it. And then eventually there's a really lovely section where they get to see what's on the camera. All the pictures they've stored up. And yeah, it's the entire last volume is basically a very long, slow goodbye to the cast, and it leaves things open. It's not like it sort of slaps you around the head or tries to like, it was all a dream bullshit you. It kind of just, it's like it lets go of the reins of the series and lets it kind of just like wander off into the sunset and leaves you behind, if that makes sense. It's still a beautiful series to read. The art gets even more sort of outlandish in some of its like its powers towards the end, as it starts to get a real good sort of handle on what looks familiar and what looks unfamiliar in the world that is starting to get more and more built up, and also more and more sparse, and the unrelenting sort of emptiness of it. So yeah, it's a really good read. Like it definitely hits its stride in volumes 4 and 5, where like you get to the point where you're thinking, oh man, I hope this never ends, and then volume 6 starts and you think, oh, but this is going to end. Like there gets to be a weird little magical point in that series where you think, well, the author could totally just milk this series for basically ever at this stage. Like, you're at a point where you know the characters well, you know how they're going to approach things. They've got a massive plurality of subjects they can cover, but the author then says, no, this is now the ending section. Like, I'm going to end this on my terms, and this is the ramp towards it. Which I'd rather it ended appropriately rather than never ended and then just suddenly went, oh, I guess we're out, shit. So, yeah, really melancholic feeling towards the end of that, where I really appreciated my time with the series and really loved the characters and all their goony little idiosyncrasies. There's a part where the characters, like one of the characters, Cheeto, the more sort of serious, uptight one, basically has a good old cry, and it kind of nearly got me. It nearly reached through the page and got me as well, honestly, where I was like, okay, yeah, she's getting to let it all out. Now's not a good time for her, and she's getting to, let go. And it felt overdue, but also a very important part of that series kind of winding down, of just letting a character have a weep. So yeah, really good, really good stuff. Really love it dearly. I already plan to, in a few months, give it a reread once I've had a little bit of distance from it, which sounds a bit sort of wussy and sort of distancing already, but I kind of want to wallow in my thoughts with it for a bit before I jump straight back into rereading it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds fair. And yeah, I mean, it is definitely, I think, a series that, having watched the anime adaptation, which I'm pretty sure does, like, cover the whole thing through, like, I definitely like to read it in its source medium, because it sounds like it does a great job, and given that I enjoyed the first volume, I will hopefully find some time to work through the rest of it at some point in time.
Yeah, when I was gearing up to read the last few volumes, I kind of just... it was one of those series where whenever I had a spare moment and my hand was anywhere near my tablet, I was picking it up and like and reading it, even just a few pages. Like I was it was my constant companion at that point. It was the one thing it was the first thing I wanted to go and do, was to continue reading Girls' Last Tour. There's only a few things recently that seized me in that regard. So it was kind of I feel like that's a feather in its cap. So I'd like to give that as my endorsement.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, as things barrel towards the end, and you know when the end is coming because you know how many volumes are left, and it really kind of, I feel like at one point the author kind of transitions the characters slightly, because they know they've got you. Like if you're still reading, then you are invested in the plight of the two main girls, you're invested in the world, and you have trusted the author with your like emotional like baggage basically, or like you're expectant on them, and they treat it well. Like it's not like a case of just Goonie times forever. Like the author knows they've got you, and the author Tsukumizu like knows that, okay, I can't really waste this. Like the attention is a powerful commodity in the case of manga, because that's what pays the bills. So yeah, it's just that they respect that, right? It respects your time and your interest. So I think that's an important thing to mention about a series.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay, so that's Girls' Last Tour. So yeah, moving on to our picks for this week. So if you don't mind, Andy, I've got a wind up me, so I'll carry on now.
Yeah, let's go for this.
Cool. So this is the first volume of Are You Lost, which I picked out because I read it previously and quite enjoyed it and thought I might like to revisit it. The original story is by Kentaro Okamoto, illustrated by Ruby Sagara, published by Kodansha in both Japan and here. It's not yet complete. It's currently ongoing in Japan at 4 volumes long, of which 3 volumes have been translated and released by Kodansha. You can buy it from all good digital stockists at the moment. I believe there is also an anime coming in the summer season, if I remember correctly.
You are correct, yes. It is going to be a short anime series, so I don't know whether that means 3 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever an episode, but yes, it is coming this summer.
So 3-minute or shorts works for this series because the original chapters in the manga are 9 to 10 pages, and they kind of cram a lot in. So basically, if you've been reading manga or watching anime for any length of time, you'll know that the girls after school club sort of trope or genre is a popular one. You get 4 to 5, usually 4 girls who have a common interest. You throw in a newbie and you get to tell them all about that particular thing through the lens of like introducing the new person to the existing characters, and you have character drama and comedy and all that sort of stuff going on. Like, you have your sound euphoniums in the case of like wind band, brass band even, brass, Jesus, I'm gonna get murdered by a music student. And you have things like, Yuri Yuri, which is basically just 4 girls goofing about endlessly. But in this case, Are You Lost kind of like flip things on the head a little, because it's 4 girls out of a school trip on a plane who crash land onto a deserted island, and their attempts to basically survive on this island. It also inverts the expert to Egypt ratio, because you have one character, Onimusha, I think, Onimusha Homore, who is basically an expert at survivalism. She's basically female Bear Grylls, but less ridiculous. And so Homore is a survivalist. She has gone on a lot of extreme camping holidays with her dad and is now getting to apply that knowledge in the real world with these three idiots she's managed to survive along with after this plane crash. So at the start, they kind of make their way to the island and then have to survive by collecting water, making a shelter, finding something to eat that won't poison them. And mostly, quite a lot of it is Homore kind of holding in check the idiot impulses of her new friends, which include Asuka, the sporty one. You have Shiho, the Ojo-sama / spoilt rich girl, and I forget the last one, the bookish one who plays video games and kind of just like wants to rely on books but can't really do so. I forget her name, sorry. But yeah, so you get this cadre of four girls, and as they get through surviving, and it's kind of fun. I really enjoy it because it has a good ratio of exposition and narration and actual sort of real fact. Here is how you survive, and here is a danger and what might kill you sort of end to it. But also goofy hijinks and a bunch of high school girls who have to very quickly get over the fact they don't want to eat snails, and or drink water, and or keep trying to do stupid things that are going to end up getting them killed. And a lot of them do a lot of things where they do things they don't really want to, or have to throw away the concept of shame, on this island. And it kind of goes from there, and it kind of helps because they all bounce off each other in interesting ways, and they make an interesting sort of character scope where the survivalist character is herself a complete, straightforward kind of a nut for this stuff, and is, if anything, seems to be quite glad to it being applying all her skills, even though it means that she's no good at the whole social element for things. So the rest of them think she's completely off her rocker, but are glad she's around. So yeah, I kind of enjoy it in that regard because it kind of, as I say, it balances out the comedy. And also so far there's been a grand total of one panty shot, and it doesn't make a habit of it. So while the characters, it's a bunch of teenage girls, there's not like, hey, check it out. Ugh. It kind of keeps all that stuff stowed well away and doesn't go near it, thankfully. So yeah, I really enjoy it. I've already read to volumes 2 and 3 where it kind of trips up a bit more. But develops more of an ongoing sort of storyline, because by the end of this first volume, they've survived 10 days on the island. They have a source of water. They have a semi-easy source of food, and they can kind of get along without killing each other, basically. So yeah, I kind of really enjoy it for that reason. I'd be interested to see what the anime does to it, because it could chop up the individual chapters quite easily. But yeah, did you enjoy it, Andy? When I was reading through it, I thought, man, this might leave him completely cold. So,
yeah, I've got to admit, like, my first impression of it wasn't that great. Like, the first chapter or two, like, I wasn't particularly into it. It felt very much like a series that had kind of, it felt very much like the author was like, oh, I want to write about, like, survival techniques, and it was just, like, lots of shoehorned in kind of like exposition and tips of just like, well, let me tell you how to do this. But actually, like, once it got past the first couple of chapters, like, I think the smartest thing this first volume does is it does actually start to kind of grow and develop all of its cast of characters, like, especially the other girls that kind of, orbit around Homare. Like, all of those characters sort of start off as just, on the one hand, just your typical, like, oh, I'm just a dumb schoolgirl, and also, like, with the tropes that you mentioned, but actually they all get fleshed out quite nicely. They all kind of get rounded out, and by the end of the first volume, I kind of ended up sort of liking them and rooting for them all a little bit more, and I think that's kind of, that's what turned me around on this series, because, it still occasionally goes a little too deep in terms of just like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to talk about subject X, but, like, it had enough character and enough kind of heart to it to make that stuff work and to make that stuff kind of enjoyable, because, it had a better balance of that against sort of, the characters bouncing off of one another. So yeah, come the end of it, I was definitely like, went from starting this volume thinking like, oh man, like, I'm definitely not going to read any more of this past the first volume, to get into the end of that first volume. It's like, I kind of want to see more of what happens to these girls and, like, you know, how they continue to survive, assuming this series doesn't end with them all, like, starving to death, because that would kind of suck the atmosphere out of this series. But yeah, I kind of ended up quite liking it. I had a pretty good time with it as a whole.
Yeah, as someone who's rereading it, I think the fact that it like the characters really are paper cutouts for the first 2 or so chapters when it's setting up, and it's only in chapter 3 you finally start actually getting names. And they introduce themselves to each other, which I can imagine, like you say, like on your first read, it's probably really off-putting where you're like, what the hell's going on? This is just a really like thin excuse just to kind of like Wikipedia me. Whereas rereading it now and knowing who the characters are, I think it works really well, but at least personally, because it allows them to get the groundwork out of the way and then move on to introducing the characters into it, even though they've already been acting and been active participants in their own survival. But yeah, it does also help that, you know, as the reader, sometimes you're on the side of the 3 Egypts, because you don't want to see the boring survival thing. You want them to go and eat something, or you want to, you know, when one of them decides to derail the entire series for a good 2 chapters because she wants a shower. That's a pretty good part of it, I feel, is where it, like, you know, the characters at one point go, look, we're not just plot ciphers, you know, we are fake high school girls. We have to have some mod cons.
Yeah, and I do also enjoy the dynamic of that as well, because it would have been very easy just to, like, write Hamare's character as just, like, the hard ass of just, like, no, we need to do this, we need to do the survival stuff first and foremost. But, like, she kind of, like, warms to the other girls as well. Like, when the whole shower thing comes up, she just kind of, like, at some point she just throws her hands up like, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, hygiene is important too, so fine, like, we'll build your shower, even though it probably shouldn't be priority number 1. Like, I hear what you're saying, and I'm willing to kind of accede to your demands on this one. And there's a really enjoyable kind of back and forth between those cast members where, like, they're willing to make concessions for one another, and kind of, like, you feel that there's sort of an understanding developing, like, as much as they can all be idiots in on their own terms, there is kind of like a group dynamic that builds up that was actually kind of enjoyable to watch kind of being fleshed out.
Yeah, it definitely is a case of, for people who, you know, they're in different classes in school and they would barely talk to each other, but now it's like, well, you know, we don't have to be best buds, but we've got to get on with it. So it really kind of helps flesh that out. And also, the one thing I do like actually about the show in particular is it doesn't harp on about, it has some basic sort of stuff. They've taken actions to make themselves known if there is a rescue party you go past. But they aren't constantly harping on about, oh no, like they make the odd reference of, oh, how long's it been? Oh, it's been about 5 days. Oh man, but they don't constantly harp back on about their life outside of being shipwrecked, which sounds callous, but I kind of prefer it because it means they can get on with the interesting character development in the moment rather than just flashback city.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting as well, because it's kind of like perhaps the bleakest the series gets is when there are a couple of moments where, like, Hamare in particular is like, I should probably not mention to these other people that, like, it's really strange we haven't seen any rescuers yet. Like, this is actually really bad news because you'd expect somebody would have come looking for us by now, but I'm just going to keep that to myself because, like, I don't want to demoralize everybody else. That's kind of a bit of a, like, oof, okay, this isn't all just cute schoolgirl shenanigans, is it? Like, there are some stakes here.
Yeah, I think it plays that well because, it lets the most put together member of the team have that information, but then know what to do with it. It's like, okay, let's not worry about this too much. Yeah. So yeah,
for sure. I think that the one thing I would perhaps disagree on with you a little bit on is, like, the amount of fan service in it. Like, maybe I'm just, like, desensitized at this point, frankly. Yeah, I mean, certainly it doesn't go too kind of full on, but there's definitely a fair amount of male gaze and kind of, like, nudge nudge wink wink stuff. That's it's kind of it's not too in your face, and it's kind of. It's built into the series in a way that you can certainly make the argument of just like, oh, well, this is just like organically, how this pans out. But it's definitely like the way it's kind of framed within panels and things. It's like, yeah, I kind of see what you're doing there. And like, that's definitely a sort of a male gazy way to look at it. So that it never got to the point of being unbearable for me, but it's definitely the kind of moments of just like, yeah, you're kind of being a little bit skeevy in this bit. I see you.
Yeah, no, you're right. You definitely get to a point where you think, okay, you're taking top off again, I guess. Like, okay, fine. Yeah, I mean, it makes it easier because there aren't like, characters in the mid-foreground like salivating over them, but it still means that it's still a treat for it's still intended as a quote unquote treat in air quotes, treat for the reader, which, yeah, kind of gets a bit, I must admit at this point, I think I've been slightly, desensitized to it, so it's my own fault. As someone who's being pandered to, I don't see the pandering at all. Weird. But I'm interested to see what the anime does with it, because I think honestly a 3 minute or short would be a good way to do this series without making someone get worn out.
I mean, I think my concern about that is that if they're just making it kind of like survival tip of the week stuff, that then they're not going to have enough time to kind of do the character building stuff, and that it might kind of it might fall flat on that front and just be like, watch the cute girls, eat some kind of like seafood or whatever. And, I feel like if you strip away too much of that, then it just kind of turns into the thing that frustrated me about the early chapters. So I hope that they have the runtime and that they get the balance right on like realizing that the character interactions and building those characters is just as important as, look, here's some cool survival information stuff.
Yeah. I'd argue the character stuff is perhaps more difficult and also more important because it actually makes the series a lot more bearable than just a weird sort of hardcore Millets catalogue.
Yeah. Although I will also say, like, I hope we're either going to get like a spin-off or a prequel or something about all the other times Hamare's got stranded, because there's like a point in this series where like, has this happened to you before? It's like, oh yeah, I get stranded a lot. And it's just like, there's some stories there like that we need to be appraised of.
So at the risk of like kind of this is not a spoiler, but you get a lot more of those in future volumes.
Awesome.
That starts to get slightly silly, but always just enough on the side of believable that you're like, oh, okay.
I mean, I think that's actually one of the other things that like the series does well as a whole, like, because if you step back far enough from this series, like, it is utterly absurd, but somehow, like, it's earnest enough and it sells itself enough that you're just like, yeah, sure, all of this is believable and makes sense, and yeah, like, of course, they almost got eaten by a shark. I'm totally willing to buy into all of this stuff, and like, it manages to kind of manage that suspense of belief pretty much perfectly.
Yeah, I feel like the thing it does in particular is it doesn't give you too much time to think about it or come up with your own solutions. It's like, here's a problem, here's how we solve it, moving on. Like, it doesn't over egg the pudding, as it were, which would make you then go, hey, wait a minute, like every 5 pages.
Yeah, so it's very confident in all of that stuff. And when it does, like, with its actual survival stuff, when it takes the odd liberty or two, then it feels like the need to throw in a note of like a kind of, don't try this at home, kids. Yeah. Which is just like, fair enough.
It's very important. There is a little author note saying, don't lick toads.
Yeah,
very important to know that.
Yeah, that saved my life, because who knows, I might not have been here to do this podcast were it not for that important note.
Just run around and find a Scottish toad and give it a good old lick. Ooh, it's like Bugfast. Oh god. Oh dear. Cool. So yeah, that's our You Lost Volume 1. Yep, available from all good stockists, I suppose, digital ones. So moving on, perhaps the bigger headline of this episode is your pick, Andy, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, so my pick for this show is Our Dreams at Dusk, Shimanami Tasogare, Volume 1, which is a series written and illustrated by Yuki Kamatani, which, I mean, basically, like, I have many people in my timeline just shouting about how great this series is and, like, how important and accurate it is in terms of the way it discusses LGBTQ kind of relationships and kind of the trials and travails of such in kind of our current world. And I've seen enough people talking about it in ways that absolutely sold me on needing to read it. So I wanted to check it out for this podcast. It's a 4-volume series that is complete in Japan. Only the first volume is out in English thus far from 7 Seas. But I haven't read this first volume. I definitely want to check out the rest of it as it comes up. So basically, the story is about a boy called Tasuku Kaname. And you kind of join him in very much in a something of a tight spot, because as kids at school are wont to do, like, everybody's joshing around. Somebody's grabbed his phone to have a look through it, and they found a whole bunch of gay porn and have no compunction about basically yelling to the rest of their class, like, "Hey, I found gay porn on this guy's phone," blah, blah, blah. Tasuku, of course, like, tries to play it off, like, "Oh no, it's just my brother, like, playing a prank on me," blah, blah. Nobody really buys into it. And of course, Tasuku is utterly mortified by this. And as far as he's concerned, like, his life is over at this point. Like, you know, he's effectively been outed as gay in front of his entire class, which he is, clearly. But, you know, he's certainly not ready to grasp that nettle. And, you know, none of his classmates are either. And so he considers just, like, topping himself there and then. He contemplates kind of suicide. He's thinking about, like, you know, jumping off of a cliff, effectively. And then he sees this strange kind of woman in some nearby building that effectively catches his eye and seemingly, like, jumps off a tall building herself. So he kind of goes to rush to find out what's happened, and ends up at this kind of drop-in center, which is somewhat presided over by this strange woman who nobody knows the name of. She's literally just known as Someone San. And he kind of ends up effectively, like, blurting out all of his troubles regarding his sexuality to this woman, who makes it very clear. It's like, you can say what you want to me, you can, like, tell me anything you like, I'm just not gonna listen to you, so just, like, get it out of your system, effectively. But kind of more broadly, like, he ends up falling in with the other characters at this drop-in center, and in this first volume we're introduced majorly to another couple of characters who are a lesbian couple who kind of live together. And it also kind of explores their struggles and their kind of own different takes on, you know, their sexuality, their relationship, and how they sort of deal with that in relation to the outside world. And you kind of see, like, you know, the friction and the troubles that come out of that. And all the while, kind of, Tasuku is still kind of still wrestling with his own problems. Like, you know, obviously he has to continue to go to school with all of these rumors kind of swirling around him, and he's not really sure, you know, how to deal with that with his classmates or even his friends. He also has a crush that is kind of, like, eating him up from the inside, because, you know, clearly he can't go and confess to this other boy who, you know, he has eyes on for numerous reasons.
It's basically the single most, like, forbidden fruit possible. So good job with your choice there, lad.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, like, this first volume works on two levels. Like, first of all, like, its handling of those issues of kind of, you know, sexuality and, you know, presenting yourself to a world that is not understanding of that is really kind of hard to read in places, but, like, it feels very real, like, even as a straight white guy who can't really comment on that. Like, it very much ties into, you know, things I've seen and, you know, things I've heard. And I think anybody who's been to school at all will kind of know how, you know, how things like sexuality are kind of used as sticks to beat people with, and pejoratives in ways that are, you look back on as a grown up and just think, oh my God, like, well, terrible human beings we all were.
Yeah. And even the people who think they're being kind are perhaps even being worse. And every day is an unending travail, and even 5 minutes in a situation you don't want to be in, but you have to because it's school, can feel like the end of absolutely every world that you've ever lived in. The series is a complete, like, there's a part where Tasuku kind of comes to, like, as far as he can, like, he himself is highly in denial in many ways, and as you say, he cannot grasp any kind of nettle. And he comes to a realization at one point of, like, okay, tomorrow's a new day, which is something my head teacher used to say, and I kind of lived by for a long time. And he's like, no, it's a fresh new day. We'll see what happens. And then within literally 5 nanoseconds, everything goes to hell in every way he feared. And then he is left completely without any kind of armor or ability to deal with any of it. And yeah, it kind of plays out as you might expect, but it's really powerful, especially in those moments of, oh, there was no correct answer here, and maybe he chose a bad answer, but there was no good answer.
Yeah, and like you say, even the people who are kind of trying to be on your side, who are your friends, like, you know, they do their best, but they don't want to be in the firing line to the point of actually being, you know, of any help to you. And in the end, that's just all the more painful because, you know, you just see that kind of line in the sand that they can't cross. And, you know, you have that kind of contrasted to, you know, the two kind of adult characters that he meets, that aforementioned lesbian couple. And like, life's not really any easier for them. Like, you know, they kind of talk about, you know, their own kind of family situations and, you know, their work situations and what that has meant to them. And, you know, it's kind of, it would be so easy to write a story that is just like, you know, confused young boy, you know, meets these older characters who are just like, no, let me tell you how it's all going to be great once you're older. And it's like, no, here's the actual reality that you're going to have to fight with and struggle with this stuff pretty much your entire life to a greater or lesser extent. Like, it's just going to be a case of kind of making the best of it, finding people who will actually support you unequivocally and, you know, give you what you need and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so all of that is, you know, really fantastically rendered. You know, it is very kind of powerful, very forthright and really, really interesting, you know, in terms of those characters and, you know, I think very relatable in terms of, you know, how it tackles all of that stuff. And all of that is just allied to some really fantastic visual imagery. Like, I can't think of many other series that put across some of the kind of emotional turmoil and troubles of Tasogare in particular in such a kind of perfectly encapsulated way. I mean, kind of, having just talked about my solo exchange diary, which is a series from an author who's really good at explaining things with words and kind of like, you know, putting together sort of an allegory or some kind of comparison or some kind of phrase that lets you understand something that is kind of outside of your lived experiences. This manages to do very much the same thing, but just simply with images. Like, there are some really great, powerful moments that kind of illustrate Tasogare's kind of, you know, current state of mind and what everything going on around him is doing to him. That kind of runs the gamut, like that moment that you mentioned where, you know, he goes into class kind of saying, hey, this is a new day, and just immediately gets kind of bombarded with, you know, with garbage effectively. Like the way that is framed and kind of, you know, the way everything sort of closes in around him is just very kind of evocative and very real, I think, for anybody who's, you know, ever been in any kind of stressful situation like that. The kind of this claustrophobic feeling that you're in a situation that you can't just really easily walk away from, and it's just kind of horrific. Like, that is just illustrated really well, just with visual imagery rather than any kind of like internal monologue per se. And there are some great things around his kind of crush as well, you know, of just kind of moments where, you know, it literally kind of shows him just shattering to pieces kind of in the wake of what he's feeling and thinking in that moment. That again, I think it's kind of universal in terms of what it's really talking about, because it is kind of always something that's not directly related to sexuality per se. But like it just puts that stuff across in a very, you just kind of, you see that image and you understand, you know that feeling, you can kind of feel it for yourself just from like the images at hand. Yeah. And all of that stuff, like you put those two things together and you've got a very kind of powerful bit of storytelling.
Yeah. And it's all the more powerful, I feel, in this series, especially because Tasogare himself is so, like, he's being torn every which way, by himself mostly, but also by his situation, where even in the confines of the drop-in center, which he slowly starts to warm up to, he is still basically completely alone. And like there's one section like halfway through the volume, where there's basically he gets shattered in one way, and I'm not going to kind of elaborate further, but it's such a perfect view of the character, because you can see in his own eyes that the character has realized something, but also is stuck with like appreciating and apprehending what is happening to him and what he's feeling, and how he is now, all the pieces have fallen into place, which has led to him exploding. Like, it's an amazing visual, like, it's a single page visual metaphor that is really perfect in how it is bringing across, like, how painful and strong everything is for Tasaku, given how undefended he is. Like, he is so innocent, but also, has clearly been thinking about it prior to this series starting. It's not like it's gone through the whole journey of, wonder what's up with this. It's just a case of, like, page 1 is the single most uncomfortable way of getting outed by your friends who immediately think it's shit. Page 2, suicide attempt. It's real. Like I mentioned always before about strong starts, and this series basically hits the ground like at Usain Bolt pace, like Sonic the Hedgehog speed, and never stops from there. Even in its quiet moments, it still feels like it's like careening, not out of control, but it's just moving so fast. Like, things are in control, and Tasaku certainly rarely has moments of control, but he does have agency in all this. But my God, everything is moving so fast, and I think my skin just stripped right off of me reading it. So
yeah. I mean, it definitely kind of has that feeling of, like you say, like, it's not that things are spiraling out of control, but they're always just on the edge. They're just on the kind of the lip or the rim of things where you feel like at any point it could just all fall apart, which again, I think is very much, even outside of kind of the specifics of this situation, is a very kind of hormonal teenage feeling as well, of just like you're always on the edge of just everything in your world just collapsing down around you, because there is this one massive thing in your life that is just the thing you obsess over everything else, and like it's only made all the more important because of like how important it is to the character and how it defines them. But there is definitely like something that runs through this that I think is kind of like anybody can relate to, if you think back to your teenage years, of just kind of like so many moments where it just felt like everything hinged on this one specific thing. And if that goes wrong, then it's all going to just fly to pieces.
Well, even as an adult, you can quite often get moments when you suddenly realize that you don't have control, or you lost control, or maybe you never even had it. And you are left sitting there thinking, I thought I had this all sorted. And it's like, no, totally not. You are totally at the whim of all this now. You can buckle up and prepare. So, yeah. I mean, and also, like, it's a very, as mentioned in previous, it's a beautiful series in artwork. It has a lot of lavish detail. The author, I believe, is either a big fan or lives in the surroundings of Onomichi, of where it's set. It has a really adorable little map where it is like basically showing you where the series is set using the like pattern of a calico cat as its map, which is, there's a lot of hidden cats in this series. They're kind of just around in the margins. I don't know how many are living in that drop-in center. There's at least 3. But yeah, and even the other characters, the lesbian couple, even they are like, they have their arguments, and they say, we have arguments, and, we fight sometimes, and, even they have disagreements of how to handle, their new friend, basically, and also their own home lives. And, even that's fascinating, and also very raw, even for those who appear to have everything sorted out, or at least know what they want to do.
And I think that's kind of presented really smartly as well, because when Tasaku first meets kind of one of that couple, and she's like, oh yeah, like this other girl, like she's my wife, like we live together, and his instant reaction is like, you're so lucky. And it's like, and she sort of just raises an eyebrow kind of in that moment of just like, yes, but also like it's not quite as simple and idyllic as you make it sound. And then kind of for the rest of that volume, you see the layers peeled away of just like, yeah, like, you're right. They are really lucky. Like, they have something fantastic going on, but also it's not just this easy idyllic thing that they fell into that you perhaps think it is from like a first glance.
Yeah.
And I think the way it kind of, it sort of deconstructs his instant reaction of just like, yeah, that's just awesome. Of just like, this is hard fought and hard earned, and it's still not easy, is just like perhaps the most important thing that series does, which again, like, it would have been so easy to be like, yeah, here's your idyllic lesbian couple, here's the thing to aspire to, but it's very much just like, no, this is a very hard-earned relationship that still requires a lot of constant work, at least in part simply because of the difficulties of the world around these two characters.
Yeah, the thing it made me appreciate, and this is fucking like, privileged white dude ahoy, but the thing it made me appreciate is that the drop-in center is very important in these characters' lives, as is the non-profit organization they do, where they are retrofitting abandoned houses in the local area to, because people aren't going to do them on their own, so they're doing it. And it's a really wholesome sort of scene. They have real jobs alongside, so it kind of puts light to the whole get a job hippie thing. But the one thing that became apparent is that the drop-in center is very, very important to them, as is the non-profit organization and the various friendships they have, because they are having, because of their life and their sexuality, they are cut off, like, if not directly or legally, they're cut off socially from a large amount of just the infrastructure of social life and the community, and the general world. And they're having to, as a result, make their own sort of communities and their own safety nets completely parallel to the existing structures. Like, one of the lesbian couple said, I had to leave my last job because I couldn't handle it, because when I came out, things actually got worse, and when I hoped it would make the sexual harassment stop. And she basically had to leave her job, and, her parents were constantly like, oh, why'd you do that? And she's like, well, I can't really say, because that's going to make things awkward. So the thing it hit home to me was, you can say, oh, well, equal marriage. It's like, yeah, but that's not the point. They're still outside of a large amount of stuff that is so taken for granted and so effortless for every bugger else, that it's a real trial and a real journey and a real hassle just getting this stuff done. And just getting on with your life as you want to live it, and as should be owed to you. In that, you always, you still see, like, there was that recent event, and this is going to date the podcast, but there was that lesbian couple beaten up on the tube, like, not too long ago. So, and they, because a bunch of blokes said, oh, go on, kiss. And then they got upset and started wailing on them. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, and not even things like that, just like, getting support, local government support and such. It's a whole parallel, like, world they've had to create to keep themselves safe, which should, in an ideal world, be entirely unnecessary, but is very much necessary for them to not be constant, like, reacting wrecks. So, yeah, again, this is fucking Babby 101, realizing that not everyone has it easy, but the series really drove that home to me without, very importantly, like, sitting me down and spending 5 pages just blurting it right in my face. Like, it did all this effortlessly and maybe completely unconsciously, at which point, good job. You really did a good job with this, of making me realize this and go, oh shit, this is exhausting. Like,
yeah, and I think that's kind of the smart thing it does with kind of the couple that Tasaki meets here, is because it kind of covers both ends of the spectrum, because, like, one of the couple has kind of, like, come out to, family in workplaces and things, and you've kind of got that end of the story of the which is kind of the idealized just be yourself angle, and it's just kind of like, yep, I've done that, and these were the consequences of this is kind of what I've had to put up with. Whereas, like, her wife is kind of the opposite angle of just like, okay, well, don't shove it in people's faces, just like keep quiet about it. And it kind of shows the struggle that you have from that point of view of just trying to hide that part of yourself and be like, oh no, this girl I live with is just a really good friend, etc., etc., and, like, the difficulties of that in various kind of strata of society. And it's just kind of it is kind of like you say, it's just this kind of really shocking kind of hitting home of just like, this should be easy for these people because they're just living their best lives, but it's not. Like, no matter how you spin it, no matter which way you come at the problem, like, there's a society that's not prepared for you, and that really sucks, to put it very bluntly and obviously.
Yeah.
And I think just kind of seeing the way that it kind of it discusses that and the way it kind of, like, exhibits that is really important, because on one level it is kind of like what you already know, but I think to kind of see it, like, put forward the way it is here is kind of, it is very educational at the end of the day, and it kind of does make you realize, especially like you say, as a couple of straight white dudes, it's important to kind of appreciate and understand these difficulties, and I think that's really valuable as a result of that.
Yeah, it's also, like, one thing I want to sort of mention. Sorry, I've mentioned enough. But like, it does all this with amazing amounts of verisimilitude and almost effortlessness, which kind of belies how powerful and strong it is. And it looks beautiful. Like, I don't think I've quite mentioned enough that how pretty it all looks. Like, the care in the character expression, especially Tasaku, who is like, a lot of power is put into his eyes, mostly because he's always about to cry. God bless him. But like, a lot of effort and power in all the visuals. And it looks really beautiful. And there's a lot of there's a lot of weird sort of sidestepping mysteries, like some of the other people in the Tropin Center exist, but we don't know who the hell they are, or if they have their own deal. Like there's that Tchaikovsky playing mofo, the dapper gentleman, who looks like fucking Moriarty from, Sherlock. So yeah, at least the Fate Grand Order version of him. Hey man, got to take my references where I can get them. But also, like the nature of someone-san is also the, like, not explicitly mentioned but core mystery of this series, in that who is this like magical lady who basically this magical, like, lady who will not listen to you but is extremely important. So
yeah, I mean I will say that is the one part of this volume that I'm not sure about, like, because there's a weird kind of like quasi supernatural element to that character.
Oh, totally.
That I'm not really on board with, like, against the rest of this series. Like, it feels like a strangely kind of whimsical distraction from the stuff that is kind of like really powerful in this, and maybe it kind of does something interesting and kind of worthwhile with that in later volumes. I'm certainly on board and keen to, like, see if or how that pans out. I suspect probably a lot of this stuff just doesn't get answered, but I don't know, it just felt like a weird kind of, as if it didn't quite fit. Like, the character is fine and kind of like works really well within this framework, and like you say, kind of being there as a central mystery of just like, nobody even knows this woman's name, she's just kind of here, and she's just sort of, everything revolves around her, and nobody really entirely sure why or how. But I don't know, just the times where it dips into this quasi kind of magical realm with her is just like, I don't know, it feels a little strange and a little out of place compared to the rest of it for me.
Yeah, I'm with you, but also at this point in the series, I'm willing to give it the rope with which to hang itself, if that makes sense, where, like, it doesn't quite seem to square, but I feel like the someone-san being there, like, bothered me more at the start of the volume than at the end, because at this point I'm willing to kind of leave it and see what happens. I feel like, for myself, given that I'm someone who usually loves to, like, Wikipedia up and, dissect things, especially after the fact, where I'm happy to let the series lead me and see what they do with someone-san. Like, I think theory crafting, at least personally, in my case, would probably just diminish the series as it stands, because I'm enjoying absolutely everything about it, with the one thing where I'm like, okay, let's not fret and worry over this scab and let it fall off on its own, if that makes sense. This is a very Elliot brain broken thing, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely kind of where I'm at with it. Like, it's not like I'm kind of throwing my hands up like, oh, this is ruining everything. But, like, I'm certainly, like you, prepared to give it more than enough rope. And I feel like even if none of that stuff ever really comes to any kind of fruition, like, it's not really reducing kind of the work as a whole. It's just the one thing that's just like, this feels weirdly out of place, but sure, I'm willing to run with it for now and see what comes of it. Yeah,
my personal feeling now is, even if it is out of place, I feel it is necessary but if not for the storytelling of the story that is being told, the fact it is a manga, you're reading it as a story, but also just it's necessary for the characters. Like, it feels like an intervention almost. But again, wait. I said I wouldn't, and I already started, so I'm going to stop now before I theory craft further. God damn it, Elliot. But yeah, thank you for suggesting this, Andy. I really enjoyed it, and also, like, Elliot Page idiot alert, but I'm really glad to hear it's 4 volumes, because I feel like I can deal with 4 volumes of this. I think if it was told me it was 10, I'd go, oh fuck, like, that's a lot of this to deal with.
Yeah, I was glad to kind of see that it wasn't ongoing. And yeah, like you kind of look at the cast that it's sort of introduced and put together, and like you say, the characters that we know nothing about at this point. It's like 4 volumes feels like it's going to be about right for kind of, examining Tasuku's problems and also kind of giving us the insight into the remaining cast. So yeah, like I'm in for another 3 volumes. That sounds pretty much perfect to me.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, thank you again for suggesting this, Andy. Cool.
No problem.
So, moving on, we're going to talk about what we're going to be talking about next time. So, nomination time. First and foremost, we've kind of gone for a theme here. First and foremost, I'm going to set us to read Tokyo Terror Girls, Volume 1, which I read all of previously. It's been released digitally before. The whole thing's available, 9 volumes long. And it's now being a physical release because it did so well. So hooray. You can thank me for buying it all. And Andy, how about you?
So I'm looking forward to rereading yours because I've read the first volume of that a fair few years ago now myself, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that's aged in my digital locker. So I'll have to pull that one out. But yeah, from the same author, I have picked their latest work to be released in English, Blank Canvas, My So-Called Artist's Journey, which is a mostly autobiographical take of said author's career. So that should be an interesting one.
Yeah, Akiko Higashimura, I believe.
That sounds right. I should have read that.
Her work was at the exhibition yesterday, at the British Museum exhibition, where it had some pages of Blank Canvas and also some of Princess Jellyfish. She real Blank Canvas already from the 4 pages I saw looked real fun. So looking forward to it already. Awesome. It even has like aim for the ace style and gunbuster style frigging like montage with Coach. So, oh god.
Oh well, then I guess maybe we don't even need to record the next podcast. Already recommended.
Yeah, my brain has been pickled. Cool. So thank you very much for listening. I think this has been a bumper episode. So, been a good one for me to do. So, moving on to Closedown. Our website is Screentone.club. You can find all the other episodes there, including a list of previous topics we've talked about. Podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, maybe. Tweet about it, let people know about it. This is the easiest way we get new people joining in. If you did like this episode, then maybe think about jumping into the Patreon. If you jump in now, you might be able to vote before the deadline for our next bonus episode. There's a current dead heat, so you could be the deciding vote. So you can catch us on Twitter at Screentone Club. And so, Andy, how about yourself for personal plugs?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Hannah's1979. I was going to say I'll be probably tweeting a lot of nonsense about E3, but I'm not sure anything's happening at E3 this year anymore, so perhaps not.
Yeah, I feel like there's some stuff happening at E3, but I feel like it's all been leaked already. So yeah, weird. I don't know. I just want a release date for the next Doom game.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So me, Elliot Page, you can find me at Elliot Page on Twitter, also likely to be talking about E3 and posting pictures of cats. So yeah, and you can find my digital manga search engine, mangasir.ch, which should be taking an update this week to make it somewhere near reliable again. Whoops. Elliot bad at coding. So, thank you very much for listening, and good night.
Bye, everyone.